Welcome back to Dirty Medicine's Dirty Biochemistry series. In today's video, we're going to be talking about familial dyslipidemia. Now, admittedly, the different dyslipidemias are really a pain in the butt to memorize. The reason is because if you flip through any of your review textbooks or your question banks, you've probably seen that really daunting chart, and it looks something like this. So you've got all these different types of dyslipidemias, and they're all due to different deficiencies. They all have different buildups of different lipid intermediates, and they're all associated with different high-yield findings. And because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different types of dyslipidemias, note that one of them is not shown on this chart. We'll get into that later. And each of these 6 different types has deficiencies, buildups, and findings. It makes for a huge pain to memorize. But that is the purpose of today's video. In this video, I'm going to simplify everything for you. And I'll give you a literally one sentence mnemonic that will help you get all of the questions right about familial dyslipidemia. We'll close today's lecture at the very end by talking about some other high-yield things that are not dyslipidemias per se, but that are oftentimes associated with this topic. So to begin, I'm going to fill in this chart, and I don't want you to get overwhelmed because I'm going to go through everything individually and break it all down and give you some awesome dirty medicine mnemonics. But this is what you've probably seen before, and it's the same reason that you probably have crazy overwhelming anxiety when it comes to learning the familial dyslipidemias. So we've got type 1, type 2A, type 2B, type 3, type 4, and not shown on this slide, there's also a type 5. Now again, each of these different types has deficiencies, buildups, and high-yield findings, and I'm going to simplify everything and help you master this content so that you never miss a question on USMLE or COMLEX. So in order to get all this information right, I have to give you my one-sentence mnemonic. And we'll start with the mnemonic, and then I'll break it down for you and relate it back to this chart so you can see how awesome the mnemonic truly is. So repeat after me. 1 LP, 2 LD, B adds V, 3 is E, 4 gets more. We're going to do it again. I'm going to do this a few times just to really get this stuck in your head, okay? 1 LP, 2 LD, B adds V, 3 is E, 4 gets more. Repeat after me. We're going to keep going. 1 LP, 2 LD, B adds V, 3 is E, 4 gets more. 1 LP, 2 LD, B adds V, 3 is E, 4 gets more. You absolutely have to memorize this because I guarantee you that if you learn this one sentence, you'll get every single question right. Now let me prove it to you. So 1 LP, so each of the numbers, right? 1, 2, B is for 2B, 3, 4. These all correspond to the different types of familial dyslipidemia. So let's start with 1 LP. So 1 obviously tells us that we're talking about type 1 familial dyslipidemia. LP is telling us the deficiency that causes type 1 familial dyslipidemia. So 1 LP, LP stands for LPL deficiency, so lipoprotein lipase deficiency. Now, because you've watched my videos on lipid transport, you already know what happens if LPL doesn't work, right? So if you memorize 1 LP and you know that type 1 causes an LPL deficiency, then in your head, you should already have some understanding that without LPL, you're going to get triglyceride accumulation, right? If LPL isn't working, then you can't cut and cleave. Remember, that was from the video. You can't cut and cleave triglycerides. So triglycerides are going to accumulate. So 1 LP, LP for LPL deficiency, and that will, of course, cause a triglyceride accumulation. Now, if you haven't started studying GI yet, it's incredibly important and high yield to know that anything that markedly increases triglycerides can cause pancreatitis. So type 1 familial dyslipidemia, the high yield finding is pancreatitis. That's because of a triglyceride accumulation. The triglyceride accumulation is due to LPL deficiency. And the way that you memorize LPL deficiency is by saying 1 LP. Okay, so now let's look at our chart and make sure that this makes sense in the context of what you need to know for USMLE and COMLEX. So type 1, the deficiency is either LPL or ApoC2, but in most of the questions, they're going after LPL. So 1 LP is going to tell you that it's an LPL deficiency. The buildup is going to be chylomicrons, triglycerides, and cholesterol. The cholesterol should make sense because it's a dyslipidemia, but specifically, the high yield finding is triglycerides, and that's the reason that you see pancreatitis. Okay, so this is an autosomal recessive familial dyslipidemia, type 1, 1 LP, LP as LPL. The LPL deficiency raises triglycerides and causes pancreatitis. Okay, I hope that makes sense. It should be pretty straightforward, but here you are. Let's repeat after me. 1LP, 2LD. B adds V, 3 is E. 4 gets more. So 1LP for the type 1 is the LPL deficiency. Now, just remember, triglyceride accumulation causes pancreatitis. We're going to see that here in type 1 familial dyslipidemia, but we're also going to see it in another type. So just keep that in mind. If you have a crazy amount of triglycerides, you get pancreatitis. So now let's move on to 2LD. So we've got 1LP. Now we're going to 2LD. So type 2 is due to LDL receptor deficiency. So 2LD. LD stands for LDL receptor deficiency. Okay, now this is both type 2A and type 2B. Okay, there's two different types of type 2 familial dyslipidemia. There's 2A and 2B. In both 2A and 2B, it's due to an LDL receptor deficiency. Okay, so if you have an LDL receptor deficiency, then you can't internalize the LDL. So you're going to get a buildup of LDL. This causes a tendon xanthoma, so like a little fat ball on the back of your Achilles tendon, shown here in this picture. Now, how do you remember all this stuff? Well, 2LD obviously tells you that type 2A and type 2B familial dyslipidemia is due to an LDL receptor deficiency. It also tells you that you have a buildup of LDL. It's important to understand that tendon xanthomas only occur in type 2A and type 2B. So the way that you should remember this is that you have 2 Achilles tendons, right? One on each leg, one on each foot. So you got 2 of them. So it only occurs in type 2. That's type 2A and type 2B. Okay, so now let me prove it to you that this will get you all your questions right. Let's look at our chart. Type 2A and type 2B are both due to LDL receptor deficiency. It can be caused by ApoB100 problems, which you should understand if you know the physiology of lipid transport, which we've already talked about in previous videos. But this is classically associated with LDL receptor deficiency, and they're autosomal dominant. This causes a buildup of LDL among some other things, but on the test, they're going to go after LDL, okay? So 2LD tells you LDL receptor deficiency and LDL buildup. You have 2 Achilles tendons, so you're going to see the Achilles tendon xanthoma. You also could see corneal arcus. Now, I didn't put that on the previous slide, but it ties right into my mnemonic, okay? Just like you've got 2 Achilles tendons, you have 2 eyeballs. So corneal arcus will be in type 2, and Achilles tendon xanthomas will also be in type 2. Now, the only difference, literally, the only difference between 2A and 2B is what the next part of our mnemonic tells us. So that's B adds V. So in type 2B, it's everything that you see in type 2A plus VLDL. So look at our chart. The buildup is the same in 2A and 2B, with the exception being that in 2B, you add V, right? So you have VLDL added into there. So in our mnemonic, 1LP, 2LD. B adds V. The B, type 2B, adds VLDL. So it's everything that you see in 2A, plus a buildup of VLDL. So let's keep this stupid. Let's keep this straightforward, right? We're just here for points, free points, guys. So now you know type 1, you know type 2, and you know type 2B just adds VLDL. Let's keep going. So the next part of our mnemonic, 3 is E. So we've got 1LP, 2LD. B adds V, 3 is E. So type 3 familial dyslipidemia is caused by a deficiency of ApoE. So 3 is E. This is a beautiful, beautiful mnemonic. It rhymes for your studying pleasure. So this is an ApoE deficiency. Now, if you've watched the videos in this section on lipid transport, you should know that ApoE is important for remnant reuptake. So if you don't have ApoE, then you can't take up the remnants, which means things that turn into remnants won't be taken up, which means they're going to accumulate. So what turns into remnants? Chylomicrons and VLDL. So with an ApoE deficiency in type 3, because 3 is E, you have an increase of chylomicrons and VLDL because you can't take them up as remnants, so they just build up. Now, the high yield finding for type 3 is a palmar xanthoma. So just like we saw xanthomas on the Achilles in type 2, in type 3, we see them in the palm. So look at this picture. I mean, little fat deposits in the palm of the hand. So how do you remember this, right? You already know that 3 is E, so you know it's an ApoE deficiency building up chylomicrons and VLDL because of problems with remnant reuptake. But how do you memorize the palmar xanthomas, right? How do you know the high yield finding? Well, because 3 is E, I want you to think of a hand giving the number 3. And the reason that it's a hand is because you get palmar xanthomas, right? You get xanthomas on the hand. So remember the number 3, someone giving you the number 3, that should remind you of the palm for palmar xanthomas. Okay, so now let's look at the chart. I will prove to you that in the context of USMLE and COMLEX, I've taught you everything you need to know. So type 3, this is autosomal recessive. This is due to an ApoE deficiency, right? 3 is E. If 3 is E, ApoE isn't working, you're going to build up remnants, right? You're going to build up chylomicrons and VLDL. Remember that 3, someone giving you the number 3 with their hand for the palmar xanthoma. That's the high yield finding associated with type 3 familial dyslipidemia. So guys, we're absolutely crushing it right now. You already know 4 different types of familial dyslipidemias. Meanwhile, the guy or the girl studying next to you in the library is making flashcards and failing miserably because they don't have dirty medicine. So tell them to sign up. So here we are. We've got 1 LP, 2 LD. B adds V, 3 is E. The last part is 4 gets more. So obviously we're talking about type 4 familial dyslipidemia. Now, what this is due to is an overproduction of VLDL. So when something gets more, it gets more of it. So there's an overproduction of it. 4 gets more. So we're overproducing VLDL. Now, if you followed the lipid transport videos in the dirty biochemistry section, you should already know what the consequences of too much VLDL will be, right? You'll get a lot of triglycerides. And if you get a lot of triglycerides, you get pancreatitis. We already talked about this when we talked about type 1. Too many triglycerides equals pancreatitis. So the high yield finding associated with type 4, just like the high yield finding associated with type 1, is also pancreatitis. Now, in addition to 4 gets more, type 4 is due to more VLDL or an overproduction of VLDL. You can also memorize that VLDL has more letters, right? So it's got more letters than LDL, more letters than IDL, more letters than TG. So that can also help you remember that this is due to VLDL. Okay, so let's look at the chart. Type 4 gets more. So it's due to VLDL overproduction, right? More VLDL. So you're building up VLDL, but you're also building up triglycerides because that's a consequence of too much VLDL. And if there's too much triglycerides, too many triglycerides, of course you get pancreatitis, okay? So let's look at some common themes here. Too many triglycerides in type 1 and type 4. So pancreatitis in type 1 and type 4, okay? Very, very important and high yield to know that association. So here's the beautiful mnemonic, and you've now learned them all, right? 1 LP, 2 LD, B adds V, 3 gets E, 4 gets more. If you guys aren't sick enough of hearing me say this yet, then when you're just hanging out at home, when you're using the bathroom, showering, say this to yourself because it's going to save you points. Now that's all the familial dyslipidemias that are incredibly high yield that you need to know, but there is more. Wait, there's more. I've got more high yields for you. Now, the information that comes after this slide is still important, right? Don't get me wrong, it's still high yield, but it's just one step down from everything we've already talked about so far. So if you're finding that your brain is too crammed and you can't learn any more information, then maybe stop the video now because these are still important, don't get me wrong, but they're a little bit lower yield. But just to be complete, I want to give you everything that you need to know. So there is a 5th type, right? There is the type 5, but it's really easy because it's basically a combination of type 1 and type 4. Which is super easy to remember because 1 plus 4 is 5. So type 5 is the same as type 1 plus type 4, and 1 plus 4 is 5. So this is like a no-brainer. I'm not even going to waste any more of my breath. If you got a question about it, think about the mnemonic for 1 and 4, and then put them together, and that's what you're going to see for type 5. What I do want to spend just a couple minutes on is something called beta-lipoproteinemia, okay? This is a disease that's not a dyslipidemia, right? It has nothing to do with what we just talked about. But it gets lumped into this section in a lot of study sources and question banks because it has to do with a problem with lipoproteins, okay? So before we even get into this, I want to break down the word for you because I'm a big believer in understanding language and like prefixes and suffixes in order to help you answer questions right. So if you don't know what this disease means and you're taking a total guess, look at the freaking word, guys, right? beta-lipoproteinemia. So A means not having. Beta-lipoprotein means not having beta-lipoproteins, and emia means blood. So the whole thing is beta-lipoproteinemia, or not having beta-lipoproteins in the blood, okay? So if you don't have beta-lipoproteins in the blood, the symptoms should make perfect sense to you. So this is due to a deficiency of ApoB48 and ApoB100, right? So not having the beta lipoproteins, right? The B lipoproteins, not having B48 and B100. So if you don't have those, then you already know what's going to happen, right? Because we talked about what these do in the lipid transport videos. So it should come as no surprise to you if you've been studying that if you don't have ApoB48 and you don't have ApoB100, you're not going to have VLDL, you're not going to have LDL, and you're not going to have chylomicrons, right? Now this is a problem, major problem, because if you don't have these components, then you can't process fats. That's a problem. Now this is an autosomal recessive disease, and let's talk about a couple of the associated findings that you should keep in mind just in case they ask you about this. So if you don't have VLDL and you don't have LDL and you don't have chylomicrons, then you can't shuffle lipids, right? You can't do lipid transport. And if you can't do lipid transport, you just can't absorb fats, period. So a decrease in fat absorption means you're going to see what's called steatorrhea, right? Disgusting fat in your poop. It's greasy, it's smelly, it's got a characteristic appearance and smell. If they say greasy, smelly stools, they're hinting at steatorrhea, okay? So again, A, beta lipoproteinemia, not having the B lipoproteins in the blood. If you don't have them, you can't make VLDL, LDL, or chylomicrons. If you can't make those things, then you can't absorb fats. If you can't absorb fats, you get steatorrhea, so fat in the poop. Now, what else happens? Well, you're going to get a decrease in your fat-soluble vitamins, right? Because you can't do fat absorption, so you can't absorb the fat-soluble vitamins. And specifically, there's two important vitamins, vitamins A and vitamins E. Vitamin A and vitamin E. And if you can't absorb these guys, especially vitamin E, you're going to manifest certain symptoms. So most of the symptoms of A beta lipoproteinemia come from the inability to absorb vitamin E. But vitamin A is also important. So if you memorize that A and E are the problems, the symptoms should make sense. So you can get retinitis pigmentosa and you get spinocerebellar degeneration. Okay? So take a step back and think about what this means. Not having B proteins in the blood, which means no VLDL, LDL, or chylomicrons. That means no fat absorption, which means steatorrhea. And if you have no fat absorption, you can't get vitamin A, you can't get vitamin E, which means you get retinitis pigmentosa and spinocerebellar degeneration. So guys, look, if you take the step back and you think about what this word means, it kind of explains everything, right? You know a little bit about what the B lipoproteins do, so you know what can't work, and then you know what you can absorb. Couple other things I just want to point out. One is the treatment, and two is the microscopic histologic findings. So you're going to see acanthocytes, right? Acanthocytes are just red blood cells that have a spiny appearance of them, and you can see them in this picture. Very, very classically associated with A beta lipoproteinemia. So if you see that, then consider this disease as the possible answer. The treatment for A beta lipoproteinemia is giving vitamin E, right? So if you can't absorb vitamin E, you got to give really, really high doses, get as much of it into the body as you possibly can, even if it's just a little amount, because having spinocerebellar degeneration is going to cause a lot of problems, right? If you're degenerating part of your cerebellum, you're going to have things like ataxia, balance issues, et cetera, et cetera. So you give them massive amounts of vitamin E. The other option is just to restrict triglycerides, because if you can't absorb and process them, then you just restrict them in the diet. So high yield, give vitamin E, try to restrict triglycerides. That's A beta lipoproteinemia. Again, not a dyslipidemia per se, but classically included in the discussion of this topic. So I put it here just to be complete. But guys, this is it, right? This is what you need to know. 1LP, 2LD. B adds 3, 3 is E, 4 gets more. If you know this, you will get most, if not all, of the questions on familial dyslipidemias right on test day.